Hi, and welcome to Chapter 7, Motivation Concepts. Now, motivation is a really big area in organizational behavior and organizational behavior research because it's so intertwined with performance, excellence, high-achieving individuals, high-achieving organizations. So, how you motivate people, groups, and organizations is of key concern to the business community, the research community, and of course you personally. Now, if you think about motivation, especially at the workplace, their companies are continuously making mistakes about what they do as far as motivating employees. Now, two examples of some mistakes that I've witnessed recently is an employee who was working very hard, 50 to 60 hours a week, a very taxing job, was doing the work of a person and a half, and after a month or so, or maybe 2 or 3 months of doing this and getting the work done, the order comes down from above. Oh, got to tell your employee that they have to cut their hours back down to no more than 5 hours of overtime a week. So then the employee feels like gets this news that okay, you can't work more than 5 hours extra a week. And then the employee feels like, I feel demotivated, I feel that I'm not appreciated, I feel they don't recognize the amount of effort and work I'm putting in to get the job done to keep this company going. So the person is completely demoralized, demotivated. And a better way to handle that would have been, if I was this person's manager, I would have said, okay, this person's making, they're hourly, they're making an extra $15,000, $20,000 a year from their overtime. Let's give them a promotion, give them a better title, give them a $5,000 raise, maybe a $6,000 or even $8,000 raise. This way we'll be saving money. They'll be motivated to keep doing the work and getting all the work done. And now they can manage their time as they see fit. So if they want to be more efficient or if they need extra time to get their work done, depending on the week, they'll be free to self-regulate. And now management's happy, the company's happy, they're saving money on wages. The employee's motivated and feels that they're appreciated, and that's the correct way of handling it. So you can either turn the situation around to make it a way to motivate the employee, or a way the employee is going to feel demotivated. A second situation, employee put a lot of time in to complete and develop a new project. So a very important project for the company, the face of the company, a new website and social media and advertising plan, and a huge amount of effort to get this done. And when it was completed and successful, at the managers meeting, the higher ups at the business are talking about all the accomplishments of the business and mentioning these, this redesign this and a new plan here, but didn't give any credit to the person who was most responsible for putting that together. In fact, even credited a small company that did some outsourcing work, thank them, even though they weren't at the meeting, and didn't thank the people who actually worked on getting this big initiative done. So after the meeting, these people were, 2 or 3 individuals put extreme amount of effort and time to get this stuff done and make the company look really good, felt, completely demotivated, like, I'm not getting, any recognition for this, any credit, and there was no feedback or comment. There was just, pushing me to complete this for the deadlines, and then there was actual, it was actually very functional and highly successful, but there was no feedback, there was no good job, and these employees felt completely demotivated, completely unresponsive and unlikely to put in a similar effort moving forward. So these are big problems in the workplace where, you do a good job, you put a lot of effort in, but if you don't feel motivated by your work or by your coworkers or superiors, you're not going to have a good job satisfaction. So this chapter is the basis of motivational concepts. So here we're going to talk about the framework of conceptual ideas that underline how people are motivated. And in the following chapter, we'll talk about more about how that can be applied to the organization level. So in this chapter, we're just going to build a framework. We're going to build a foundation, and we're going to talk about key elements of motivation. We're going to talk about how to apply motivation using early theories of motivation. We're going to contrast elements of self-determination theory, goal-setting theory. We're going to look at self-efficacy, and we're going to look at how these can have implications for job engagement and management. So first of all, what is motivation? We all intuitively understand what motivation is. It's the thing, we could kind of describe it as the thing that makes us want to do stuff. Or, but it's easy to see that some individuals are more motivated than others. So what's their secret? However, the reasons for that motivation are more difficult to determine. You can't always unlock that secret of why someone is so driven and motivated. When defining motivation, it is important to look at the interaction between the individual and the situation. And there are three key elements that help us define motivation. The first is intensity, or how hard the person tries to accomplish the task. The second is direction, and that is the effort that is channeled towards organizational goals. And the final element is persistency, how long the person can maintain the effort. So these are really intensity, direction, persistence. These are really three elements of motivation that can be observed, sometimes measured. But, basically motivation is, the driving will or force you have to do something and do it well. So, and generally people look at people in two states. Either you're motivated or you're demotivated. So you either want to get something done or you don't want to get something done. It's very hard to operate, in the middle ground where, you're feeling neither of those things. And that's probably procrastination. Okay. So early theories of motivation. We have Maslow's hierarchy of need theory. We have McGregor's theory of X and Y, Hertzberg's two-factor motivation, and McClelland's theory of need, the three needs theory. So we're gonna talk about these theories, and because they're important to give us a base of understanding and give a better understanding of the concept. And some of these early theories are not entirely valid anymore, but they're still very useful concepts to explore and talk about. So let's look at the hierarchy of needs theory. So basically, we start at the bottom of the pyramid, and this is the most basic need, the physiological needs. So this is sort of like, do you have your shelter, food, water, things you need to survive? And then you have your safety. So your need to feel safe or security, build a fence, build a house. Once that's met and you're feeling pretty good, your physical needs are met, your safety needs are met, then you look towards social areas for motivation, friends, family, and then you look for esteem, things you can do to better yourself, to make you appear better, to improve yourself. And then self-actuation, which is really the last big goal where you're realizing your true self, or you're spending time thinking and what you want and achieving those goals. So this first theory was developed by Maslow in the 50s, and his theory states that in every individual there is a hierarchy of 5 needs. Each need is met or satisfied, then the next need becomes dominant. So sort of like you follow this path from the bottom of the top of the pyramid. And his theory points that individuals are stuck in their existing need level until it's been satisfied and they can move to the next level. And if, for example, until their need for safety is met, they will not be able to move about too well on a social level. So if you're feeling unsafe, scared, you don't have your safety in place, social matters aren't going to be such a pressing concern. If you have a real big safety issue, you're probably going to skip the party. And the organization of these need levels may vary across cultures, but basically for the majority of everybody, this is the track. Okay. We also have this theory of X and Y by McGregor. So, added to the emotional work done in the 50s, and the motivational work done in the 50s, to develop this theory of X and Y. And McGregor believed that there are 2 distinct views of human beings that managers hold. Okay, so the theory X view is basically negative and holds that workers have little ambition, dislike work, and avoid responsibility. Theory Y, in contrast to X, sets forth that workers tend to be self-directed, enjoy work, and accept responsibility. So managers modify their behavior towards employees based on what they view and about their views and how they feel about them. So I guess, in a manager's point of view, you could be more theory X or more theory Y, or some managers can be a hybrid where some people they feel are X people and some people they feel are Y people. So X people are the people they have to keep on top of. They see them as they're not really like their job. They have to be controlled or coerced to get things done, or threatened. But they may have some employees in the theory Y bucket where these employees you don't have to keep on top of as much. They really enjoy the job. They're self-directed, self-motivated. They get things done. They're committed to their objectives. So in this particular theory, it's sort of black and white, where either you're an X or you're a Y, and it depends on your point of view. But in reality, future studies have shown people are a combination of X and Y. And sometimes you feel like an X, and sometimes you feel like a Y. And that's really could be, if you're in an X phase, you're not that motivated. In the Y phase, you're much more motivated. So the theories that have been built upon this in the future have been, how can we move people out of the X column and put them more in the Y column? What can we do to get people to be more self-driven and self-controlled and committed to achieving their objectives? Okay. Now we also have Heisberg's two-factor theory. So two-factor theory is another one of these early development theories. This theory sets forth that satisfaction and dissatisfaction are not opposites, but two separate ideas. So there are a set of factors that, when present, will help to avoid dissatisfaction in workers. This group is called the hygiene factors and includes such things as salary, working conditions, company policies. There is another set of factors that, when present, will help to cause satisfaction in workers, and this group is called motivators and includes such things as growth, responsibility, and achievement. These sets are distinct, and the presence of hygiene factors does not cause satisfaction. It just helps avoid dissatisfaction. So in this particular theory, if you look at it, we have two sides, satisfied and dissatisfied. It's two separate things. So now you would be dissatisfied in your employment if you were low paid, if you didn't like the company's policies, if the physical working conditions were tough or dangerous, you had bad relationships on the job and very low job security, you would obviously be dissatisfied. But if you had all those things, pay, good company policies, good relationships, job security, good quality of supervision, then we'd say you're not dissatisfied. Because by and large, this may be a hard theory for you to understand, but by and large, we'll take this area of pay. Pay alone, you can be dissatisfied over low pay, but generally when you have achieved a decent pay or a pay that you feel is comparable to you, you're not satisfied with that, but you can be not dissatisfied. For example, you get a raise and you're happy about that raise, and you may think you're satisfied, but a week later, you're looking for more money. So there's never enough pay to be satisfied, or there's always something better that can be done in all of these areas of this dissatisfaction chart. So anytime you achieve an improvement in this area, you get a temporary feeling good from it, but you quickly adapt to it, accept it, and you're just at a level where you're not dissatisfied. But you're not coming in every day saying, oh, I got a raise 6 months ago, I'm so excited to come back to work. And that's what you have to understand. More money doesn't necessarily motivate you or make you feel satisfied. You may think it does, but if you're someone who's worked for 20 or 30 years and you've gone through various raises or promotions, you've noticed that after you get that raise or promotion, you quickly forget about it. You just getting it is enough to keep you satisfied and saying, okay, I'm being treated well here. I'm not dissatisfied here because I'm getting my pay increases. However, you very rarely point to that and say every day and think about that raise you got last year every day as you're working. You quickly forget about it. So that's one way I can kind of explain how there's this dissatisfied to not dissatisfied scale. Now on the other side, there's not satisfied and satisfied. So this concept is more about if your job is not providing you what you need as a person to feel good about yourself, you're not satisfied. So this is more about your growth, your potential, your self-esteem, your ego, perhaps. So if you have an environment where there's promotional opportunities, where there's opportunities for personal growth, recognition for your work, responsibility and increasing responsibilities and achievement, you're going to feel highly satisfied. And when these things are lacking, that's when you're not satisfied. So when you feel like you're not being challenged, when there's no opportunities, there's no recognition, there's no achievement for you, you become, as a person, not satisfied with the work you're doing. So this is really more about think of it more about the work. So on the satisfied to not satisfied scale is really about how much you like your job, how much personal growth you're getting from your job, and how much recognition and achievement you're developing for yourself through this job. So you can understand how that's a satisfied, not satisfied state. And think of the other side as really, these aren't so much about you, but more about how you're treated. So you're either treated well or treated badly. And here, you're either achieving what you need to achieve as a person to satisfy your growth, or you're not achieving it. So that's kind of how he broke out these two sides of these factors. So kind of think of it like that. And that makes sense. I think either, we want to look at ourselves, is the company treating me with respect and treating me with an organization and job situation that's appropriate for my talents and my abilities? And over here is, am I going somewhere? Am I satisfied that this job is leading me somewhere? So that's two kind of ways to think about this two-factor theory. Okay, now the theory of needs. Let's talk about this for a minute. So another early theory of motivational theories is this theory of need, and it looks at focuses more on needs as a basis. So his theory on the idea that people are motivated in the workplace by three main needs. The first need is the need for achievement, or the drive to excel in relation to a set defined standards. The second is need for power, to make others behave in a way that they might not have behaved otherwise. And the final need is addressed in his theory is the need for affiliation. And affiliation looks at the relationship aspect and the desire for close relationships. So people have varying levels of these needs, which makes the theory difficult to measure. But if you think about it, and a lot of times these needs have these small abbreviations here, that we all have a need for achievement. That's why we go to school. That's why we try to do well at work and get promotions. So we have this inherent need to achieve, to move forward. We're very, very forward-moving species. And there's also a need for power. And this need for power does vary between people, of course, but it's a need for control. So power is a lot of times control. So a lot of people are control freaks. And the idea of having control, or the ability to make others behave in the way you want them to behave, such as a manager or a supervisor, is very appealing. So people like power, and the respect that comes with power, and the ability to control is what power is about. Now, affiliation is more social, desired for, you don't feel satisfied unless you have friends, close relationships, interpersonal groups that you belong to. So the need for, you can't share, if you can't share your achievements, accomplishments, or have other people recognize your power through an affiliation, then those two, the first two, aren't really satisfying unless you can really, kind of share it, brag about it, celebrate it. Okay, now high achievers. This is another sort of continuation on this. So the need that has received the most attention by researchers is this need for achievement. Because you can see how it's so closely tied to the workplace. So achievers will carefully measure the odds and try to take on activities that are challenging but not too high risk. So they tend to be motivated in jobs that are more individualistic in nature and provide regular and effective feedback. So wouldn't that be nice to have a job where your goals are laid out for you? They're challenging, but they're not too risky. So you have a comfort zone where you can achieve these goals, collect these achievements in an environment that's supportive, but not too risky, meaning if you fail, you don't get fired. Or if you fail, someone doesn't die. So they tend to be motivated, in jobs that are more on the individual track. So you're achieving this sort of mostly by yourself and as you go at your pace. Now, achievers tend not to make good managers because they have more personal focus. So if you're an achiever, you may not be a good leader, even a good group member, because you're more focused on a more selfish view of what you can achieve for yourself. So strong managers have a high level of a need for power and a lower level need for affiliation. So to be a good manager, you have to be able to kind of crave that power, but yet not be affected when people don't like you, when you have to make the tough decisions and you have to do things that could make you unpopular. If you're someone that really needs that affiliation and love for other people, from other people, being a manager, striving for that high level of power is going to be difficult. Because you're trying to motivate a team to move towards a given direction. You have to have that strong manager persona, and that is generally developed in managers with a strong need for power. The view that a high achievement needs acts as an internal motivator presupposes two cultural characteristics. So a willingness to accept a moderate degree of risk and concern with performance, and this combination is found in generally Anglo-American countries such as the United States, Canada, Great Britain, and much less in collectivism societies like Chile or Portugal. So societal cultures and factors play a role in what motivates you. Okay, so of the early theories of motivation, this theory has the best research support, but is less practical effect than some of the others as far as use in organizational behavior. Okay, let's look at some more modern theories of motivation. So we have self-determination theory, goal-setting theory, and management by objectives. So there are some theories that are built off of the older theories that move us more into the current line of thinking and research. So let's look at the self-determination theory. People like to have the ability to determine their actions. So they prefer this control over their actions. And if they're forced to do something, it becomes less fun. So if you feel forced to do something that you may have previously enjoyed, your motivation will decrease. So, for example, if you have a hobby that you like to do, and you decide that you're doing this hobby, or even not even a hobby, maybe you enjoy watching TV. So watching TV is something that you like and you enjoy, but then all of a sudden you get a job where your job is to watch TV, and now TV becomes a real burden, especially if you have to watch 8 hours of TV a day for your job, and you have to review this TV, and maybe you're watching shows you don't particularly care for. It suddenly can take an enjoyable activity and make it not enjoyable. And part of that is that it's become a job. Think about working out. So if you join a gym and you're paying for the right to go to this gym, you feel more motivated to get your money's worth and go to the gym and perform and work out. You may enjoy it, but then imagine the opposite. You have a job where you have to perform physical acts of lifting weights and running and other physical exertion, and that's your job. Suddenly, it becomes a lot less fun and a lot less motivating when you're getting paid to do it. So this is sort of this self-determination theory. It states that people prefer to have control of their actions. So anything that makes a previously enjoyable task feel like an obligation, then a freely chosen activity will diminish in motivation. So cognitive evaluation theory sets forth that in the workplace, intrinsic and extrinsic, so sort of in and out, inner and outer, rewards are not independent of one another. In fact, the presence of extrinsic rewards may decrease the intrinsic rewards. In addition, extrinsic rewards, managers need to realize the importance of using goal setting and verbal rewards as a method of increasing motivation. So, self-concordance considers how strongly people's reasons for pursuing goals are constant with their interest in core values. So across countries and cultures, if individuals pursue goals based on intrinsic interest, they're more likely to attain the goals and are happier when they do, and are happy even if they don't. So let's kind of talk about this for a minute. So let's look at that, cognitive evaluation theory. And it's basically saying that, extrinsic rewards such as pay, such as benefits, such as someone giving you verbal praise, or a reward, or a medal, if they were previously intrinsic reward, how can I say this? If there's some intrinsic motivation there to begin with, these can help continue your motivation. But the intrinsic motivators are more powerful than the extrinsic. So if, for example, if you're doing a job that you hate, and internally this is not a job that motivates you, internally you get no satisfaction or motivation from this job, but you're getting a lot of pay or maybe some praise, that's still not enough to motivate you. If you really hate the job, no matter what the pay is or what the recognition is, you're still not going to be motivated. You're not going to be as motivated as if you were internally interested in the job or liked your work. That's sort of the difference. Now self-concordance thinks about, how strong are your reasons for pursuing a goal, and how consistent are they with your core interests and values. So, for example, if your goal, say your values are, one of your values is helping others or giving back, and your goal or your activity is helping you, helping the hungry, feed the hungry, or work for a charity, and you're motivated by this, because it aligns with your core interest or value, then you're going to have more reasons to pursue that goal, to meet those expectations, as long as, sort of basically aligning your true self with your activities. So if your activities are in concordance with your true self and values and what you want to, what you want to achieve or the good you want to do, you're going to be more motivated. Is sort of what that's saying. Okay, so let's look at the goal setting theory. So Locke, this is developed by Edwin Locke, and it's what he called the goal setting theory. So the idea behind this theory is that when goals are specific and effectively difficult, it can lead to higher performance. So for example, if you're taking, if the goal is rather easy, you don't feel as satisfied when you achieve it, rather than when the goal is more difficult. I think we can all understand that. So this leads to higher performance when the goals are more difficult, because you're going to try harder for it. And this has to include some self-generated feedback. A difficult goal will help you as an individual to focus your attention as well as your energy to work harder. So the difficulty of the goal will increase the persistence and force people to apply to be more effective and efficient. So the relationship between goals and performance depend on how committed the individual is to the goal, as well as how specific the tasks are. So most of the research has been done in the United States, so the application of this theory is in respect of the North American culture aspects. But if you think about it now, so the core thing here is that if there's a point though, if the goals are too difficult to achieve, that could be demotivating. But so let's just recognize that and put that aside. So what we're saying here is that in order for you to feel motivated, satisfied, you need a goal that will be difficult and is, it's accepted by others as difficult and an achievement. So getting feedback along the way and seeing your progress, and that's a key thing. Sometimes when you're achieving a goal and you see no progress, that could be demotivating. So you want to see those signposts that you've met you've achieved certain steps in the goal as you're moving forward. Now, when the goal commitment is more public, that's better. So say, for example, you're trying to lose weight and your goal is to lose weight. And they found that people who lose weight in secret or in silence aren't as successful as people who lose weight in public or in groups. And that's why things like Weight Watchers or, they have websites where you state your goals and you actually get paid when you achieve them. So more public helps because it motivates you and you have some people observing your tasks. Now, if the tasks are simpler and familiar, that's better because, you understand what needs to get done. And you can make the tasks to get to the goal are understandable and achievable, but still yet can be difficult. So we all kind of should, I think, understand that goals help us to stay on track and keep us motivated and keep us forward. So if we don't have a goal, then you kind of ask yourself, what am I doing this for? What's the end result? So as human beings, we like to know that we're heading towards something. We like to move forward and we like to see that, we're heading towards something. We like to achieve goals. Getting a degree in college is sort of a good example of goal setting theory. So the ultimate goal is to get the degree, but all the steps along the way, you're getting feedback. So every test, every paper, every homework assignment, every class, you're getting a grade. And that's basically, very simple and familiar as far as the tasks you have to do and the characteristics of the task, but it's leading up to a more difficult goal to achieve that's very public and very celebrated. So that's sort of my take on the goal setting theory. Okay, MBO, management by objectives. So an implementation of a goal setting theory is management by objectives. So there's a way to take the goal setting theory and actually put it in the workplace and implement it. And we generally call it MBO. So MBO is a systematic way to utilize goal setting theory in which goals are set jointly by managers and employees. And the goals must be tangible, verifiable, and measurable in order to be effective. And I think you can understand that, it can't be nebulous. It has to be something that, we can see the tangible results of the goals. We can verify that these goals have been achieved, and we can measure the effectiveness of the achievement. So the manager helps to break down and organize the goals into smaller, more specific tasks or goals for the employee. So in order for the managed by objective to be effective, the goals must be specific. The employee must participate in the goal setting. So that's critical. So this is why good managers will sit down with employees and say, what are we trying to achieve here? And they kind of come together to figure out what the employee should be doing and set the goals together. So that way there's a participation and involvement, a commitment by the manager and the employee. And that there must be a defined period when these goals should be achieved. And feedback has to be incorporated into the process. So this is really, a very good organizational structure for management. So you want to see, what's the overall organizational goals and specific objectives for your work, your department. And then you want to break that down to individuals, and you want to say, as an individual, and you want to work together with the employees to specifically list out the tasks and the goals at a time period where you think, it's appropriate to get done a due date, and appropriate feedback along the way. And, and participation in that decision making is important with the employees so they have a buy-in. And feedback is ultimately important too. And a lot of times managers fall down greatly on feedback, that they don't really provide the positive feedback along the way to keep people on track. They only provide the negative feedback when goals or tasks fail to be met. And that you don't want to be a negative manager. Negativity is bad for motivation. Although there is a place when you need to recognize a goal has failed, but instead of being overly negative about it, you should look to work with the employee to see, okay, what went wrong? What is me as a manager, what responsibilities do I have for the failure of this goal, and how can we prevent this from failing again? What do you need? Additional resources, additional help, additional training? So you want to put it in a positive way. So this managed by objectives is most effective when managers are more positive about the goal setting and the feedback and the organization and participation with the employees. Okay, so let's look at this cascading of objectives. So this is related to management by objectives. So we can translate it into a divisional, department, and individual. So we have the overall organizational objectives. What is this company trying to do? For most companies, we're trying to maximize shareholder wealth. So you have the divisional objectives. The consumer products division, industrial products division. So we're making products for consumers, we're making products for industry. And then we have the departmental goals. So in both areas, more specifically let's focus on consumer products, we're looking for production. We have a production department, they have to make the product. We have a sales department, they have to sell the product. And we have a customer service department, they have to support the product. So then we have individuals who are going to do various tasks in each of these departments to get the objectives done. So it's really just, that's why I say it's cascading, a kind of top-down approach to looking at the objectives of the company and then setting them per individual. So you wouldn't tell a salesperson to go and make the product, and you wouldn't tell a production person to go and do customer service. So this is why it's helpful to put people in their job descriptions to know what it is they're going to achieve. Okay. Other current theories of motivation are self-efficacy theory, equity theory, organizational justice, and expectancy theory. So self-efficacy, this is an important term, and you may hear a lot of this in educational circles. A lot of people talk about self-efficacy, and this is really just another theory of motivation, and it's developed not that long ago. So it's considered contemporary. And the theory is based on an individual's belief that he or she is capable of performing a task. And the theory is a complement to the goal-setting theory and incorporates goals in the process. So higher efficacy is related to greater confidence, greater persistence in the face of difficulties, and responding to negative feedback by working harder, not shutting down. So self-efficacy is really your belief in yourself that you're capable of doing something. And now, where managers can fit in this role, or even parents or mentors, is that you want to help increase someone's self-efficacy. So we've all been in situations where we're working with someone, maybe a parent, a child, a friend, a coworker, who feels like they can't do something. So you're sort of acting as a coach, and you basically want to help them you want to help motivate them, encourage them that you can do it. So verbal persuasion can be very helpful for people. If you could say, listen, this is something you can do, you're capable of doing this. And then if the person can, when we say vicarious modeling, we're looking at a person where we're not looking at a person, but a person's watching somebody else do something. So maybe it's someone completing a task, and you say, maybe it's juggling. So you're watching someone juggle, and you say, you know what? I could do that. And it's basically you are witnessing other people perform tasks and thinking to yourself, this is something I can do. Now, also, if you have mastery, if you get to a level where you're gaining experience, the more experience you gain, the more self-efficacy you have. So say you're juggling and you start out, you're not doing well, but you're practicing and practicing and practicing. At a certain point, you feel you have enough self-efficacy to feel like you can perform in front of others. And then there's this arousal factor where you need to get energized. So maybe it's like working out. So there is amount of weight that you've never bench pressed before, and you get yourself in a psych position through music or just self motivation, and then you push that weight up. So these are all things. And maybe when you're pushing that weight up, you have someone there, verbally telling you can do it, push it. And as if you ever worked out, that's why a workout partner is really helpful, because they can give you that verbal confidence to get to do it. So maybe you're at the gym, you see someone else moving up in weights, and you've been exercising, and you have the experience to know that I can move to the next level. So all these self-efficacy models can be applied maybe in the gym or in the workplace or in many areas. So it's really about confidence. So if you feel confident, the more confident you feel that you can do something, the more likely you can do it and succeed at it. Okay, so if we look at this sort of goal-setting theory combined with self-efficacy, they don't compete, they complement each other. So this graphic here shows employees whose managers set difficult goals for them and have a higher level of self-efficacy and set higher goals on their performance. So why? Well, setting difficult goals for people communicates your confidence in them. So if someone feels confidence, if you've ever been in a situation where someone placed confidence in you, so you don't want to let them down, and you feel like, wow, they're putting me in this responsibility to lead this team. I really don't want to let them down. This is my mentor, or this is my boss, and he feels I can do this. It gives you confidence in yourself. So a manager sets difficult, specific goals for a job or a task, and the individual has grown confident that given the level of performance, he will obtain self-efficacy or achievement, or be able to complete the task. And then the individual has a higher level of job or task performance. Also, individual sets higher personal goals for his or her performance. So basically, the manager sets out, here's the job, the task. You feel I can do this, and I can do it even better. And this leads to a higher level of job performance and getting the job done better. So that's sort of how that can play out. Okay, equity theory. Basically, I call this like the fair theory. We want things to be fair. We feel better when things are fair. We seek to make sure things are fair. So, Adams' equity theory utilizes perception theory that we looked at in previous chapters. And the idea is that employees compare their ratio of outcomes to inputs to others that they see as relevant. So it's this compare and contrast. And when they see the ratios as equal, there is a perceived state of equality, and no tensions or stresses arise from that. So, however, when they perceive the ratios to be unequal, they may experience anger or guilt depending on the results and the equity analysis, and then the tension can rise and stress can rise. So this tension can motivate people to act in a way to bring the situation to a more equal state. So that's why I call it sort of fairness. So if you're working in a job situation, you're getting much more work than somebody else, and you feel this is unfair, it's going to prompt you to talk to your manager. If you feel that you're getting paid much less than somebody else, it's going to prompt you to talk to your manager or leave the job or do something to correct it. So this equity theory is really looking for comparing yourself to others to see whether or not you're treating fairly or being rewarded fairly. And this is something that we do as children with your parents. So if you have siblings, especially if you have siblings, you're constantly saying, he got this, I need that, it's not fair. And this is sort of the start of the equity theory. And we take that sort of sibling rivalry that we have when we're young and comparing what our parents give to each sibling compared to what we get, and we bring that to the workplace. So it's a very basic motivational impulse that we have, that we want things to be fair. And it sort of derived this, if you ever heard this term, you get what you get and you don't get upset, is like a parental term. So when people feel like they're getting unfair portions or that they're not being treated fairly, the mom will say, you get what you get and you don't get upset. Meaning that just be happy with what you got and don't get upset over it. And stop looking to see what this person got. Which is an interesting phrase. I use that quite often in certain cases where people are complaining to me about something being unfair, and then I just, frustrated with the situation. I'm just like, listen, you get what you get and don't get upset. And it kind of ends the conversation. Okay, continuing. Now, this theory, has been supported in research, and inequity is created by overpayment do not seem to significantly affect behavior in most work situations. Meaning, right, you're not going to complain that you get too much money. And not everyone is equity sensitive. So employees who perceive inequity, they have 6 choices to make. They can change their inputs, meaning what they put into the job, the amount of work they put in. They can change their outputs, what they're producing. They can distort. Just want to see something. Okay, they can distort their perception of their self or the perception of others. Choose a different referent or leave the field. So let's explain these a little bit with some examples. Okay, so number 1, change inputs. You can exert less effort if underpaid or more if you're feeling overpaid. So you can change in relation to how fairly you think you're compensated. You can change your level of effort. Change outcomes. So individuals paid on a piece rate basis can increase their pay by producing a higher quantity of units at lower quality. So if you feel you're underpaid, then you could work to be more efficient and maybe take some shortcuts to increase your quantity. And maybe this is hours. So maybe if you're hourly and you feel you're underpaid, you work extra hours. Doesn't mean you're doing extra work, but you're putting in more hours to get better outcome, especially pay. Distort perceptions, so you may have thought of yourself as working at a slow pace, but now you realize you work a lot harder than everyone else. So maybe this is your perception. So you may perceive that at a certain point you distort your perception of yourself and seeing yourself as a harder worker, but really you're not. Or you distort the perceptions of others. So if someone has a job that, in order to make it feel fair, you're saying, you know what, he gets paid more, but his job is much harder. I would never want to have to do that, so I can understand why he's getting more money. Choose a different referent. So basically, you can refer to somebody else. Like, I might not make as much money as my friend that I went to college with, but I'm doing a lot better than my dad or my brother. So change the referent. Leave the field. You can just quit the job. Go somewhere else if you're not happy. Okay. So let's look at models of organizational justice. So in this area, so increasingly we think of equity as organizational justice, or justice in the organizational workplace. A larger perception of what is fair in the workplace. So employees perceive that their organizations as just when they see that what they receive matches what they have put in. So that's sort of like, am I getting out of this company what I'm putting into it, as far as my efforts putting into the company, my pay being taken out of the company. One key element of organizational justice is distributive justice. So employees tend to perceive their outcomes as fairest when they are, distributed equitably. So procedural justice examines the perceived fairness of the process used to determine the distributions of the rewards. So basically, what we're saying is that if you feel that you've gotten a good result or a good amount of money, you don't really check the process as much. But if you feel that you have been shortchanged, you're going to go back and say, well, what was the process? How was my raise determined? Who determined my raise? What were the characteristics that they were looking at? What's the rubric you used to measure me? Just like maybe if you get a bad grade on the paper, you may want to say to the instructor, why did I get a bad grade? Can you break down the reasons why my grade isn't good? Rather than when you get a good grade, you may just say, hey, I got an A. Nothing to question here. Move along. Okay. So beyond outcomes and procedures, research shows that employees care about 2 other forms of fairness that have to do with the way they are treated during interactions with others. The first type is informational justice, which reflects whether managers provide employees with explanations of key decisions to keep them informed of important organizational matters. So we feel that, are we being in the loop? The second type is interpersonal justice, which reflects whether employees are treated with dignity and respect. So I think we all, can respond to that. So if you feel like you're not getting respect or the dignity you deserve for your position, that's gonna, you're gonna feel like there's no justice being served here. So these three components make up an individual's view of justice within the organization. So equity theory is popular in the United States because US-style reward system assumes that employees are highly sensitive to equity in reward allocation, meaning that if whatever you receive should be in a stated procedural process that you can understand how the reward is being achieved, and then you're actually getting something comparable to somebody else's efforts put in. So research shows, however, that in other cultures, inputs and outputs may be valued differently. So managers need to determine what is considered fair in a particular culture. And managers need to be transparent, consistent, and unbiased in the decision making. So I know that as an instructor, as a teacher, that when I'm doing grades for the class or making policies for the class, such as no late assignments or grading of papers or tests, that I have to be very transparent on how I grade and how you're earning your grade, consistent in how I grade students, and unbiased in my decision making as far as how I treat students in applying and their grades to them. And I learned the first time I taught a class, very first class I taught in 1996. I remember that a student had wanted to hand in something late, and so I was like, okay, sure, it's only a day. It's only like a day late. I'll let you hand it in. And then another student wanted to hand something in a week late, and I was a little hesitant of that, but I accepted it. And then at the end of the class, there's a student that came at the very end of the class after 15 weeks, and he brought me 10 weeks worth of homework and said, "I'm sorry this is late." And I said, "Well, I'm not going to accept this." And so he said, "Listen, you accepted this person's late assignment, and you accepted that person's late assignment. You didn't have a policy of how late was acceptable, was not acceptable. So if you don't accept these assignments on a late basis, based on the precedent that you accept these other students' late assignments, we're going to have a problem here." So I took a step back and said, wow, student lawyer here. And that's why I got that term, student lawyer, where students will, put you on trial for their rights whenever they perceive an unfairness, which I'm not saying is wrong, but I'm saying as a faculty member, I learned to be a lot more consistent and fair and unbiased in my decision making. So when it comes to, say, late assignments, it's black and white. It's either on time or it's late, and I can't make it a judgment call for one person without extending the ability for everybody to hand in late assignments. So that's just sort of an example of organizational justice in the classroom. Okay. Now, expectancy theory, there are three key relationships: effort performance, performance reward, and rewards personal goals. So the most commonly used and widely accepted theory of motivation is Victor Vroom's expectancy theory. The theory argues that the strength of the tendency to act in a certain way is dependent on the strength of the expectation that they will receive a given outcome and that the outcome is desired. So employees are willing to work harder if they believe their actions will get them an outcome they desire. For example, employees will work hard in long hours if they know that they'll be rewarded through a promotion, recognition, a bonus in response to their hard work. So this is common sense, So you perceived the perceived probability that exerting effort will lead to a successful performance is that effort-performance relationship. So you put the hard work in, you get results. And this is why sometimes diets are not so successful, because people can put a lot of hard work in, but they might be doing it wrong and they get no weight loss results and they give up. Performance reward. This is belief that successful performance leads to an outcome. So we've all been in a work situation where we performed very well, but we weren't recognized. And that's sort of that first example I gave at the beginning of this lecture, and that's very demotivating. And then rewards and personal goals. So the attractiveness of an organizational outcome to the individual. So is the goal or the achievement that you're trying to seek maybe learning to use a new program or learning new aspects of Excel, or is this something personally important to you as well as the organization? Okay, so here is the expectancy theory. Helps explain why a lot of workers aren't motivated on their jobs and do only the minimum amount to get by. I think we've all had jobs where we started out with the best intentions and we're well motivated but then the organizational culture and behavior in your boss is so horrible that you get very demotivated. So questions that employees need to answer in the affirmative, if their motivation can be maximized. So things you need to think about to help maximize your motivation. 1, if I give a maximum effort, will it be recognized in my performance appraisal? 2, if I get a good performance appraisal, will it lead to organizational rewards? And 3, if I am rewarded, are the rewards attractive to me? So this is sort of the expectancy. Think about what you expect. So if you perform well, and that's sort of the effort-performance relationship in here, if I'm going to perform, put the effort in and perform, is there going to be a reward based on that performance? And is that reward or performance going to get something that's a personal goal for me? Learning new things, making more money. So you can see this is sort of the flow. And if we have that at work, we feel motivated, we feel satisfied. Okay, job engagement. So research shows that highly successful organizations tend to have more engaged employees than the average organizations. So highly engaged employees believe it is meaningful to work, and they are inspired by the leaders and have similar views of their organization. So this job engagement is an important, as far as employees' physical, cognitive, and emotional energies in their job performance. So how engaged are you in your job? When I first started working, I was an accountant for a defense company, and I had a very low job engagement. I didn't like doing the accounting work. I felt it was boring, and I hated sitting in front of a computer all day long. I didn't like the fact that I was working at a defense company making instruments of death. So I was really not engaged. The products the company produced was not exciting to me, or and actually in some ways morally challenged my core values. And the work itself was boring, and I wasn't interested, and I had a low engagement at work, so I didn't enjoy the work. My job satisfaction was very low, very poor, and that's when I sort of realized that I had to get out. I had to go somewhere else, and I realized that I liked finance, but I didn't like accounting. And I picked a job educating and teaching because I had a high job engagement. I really got very involved when I teach and when I work with students and when I educate, and that produced a huge amount of job satisfaction for me. So in organizations where employees are highly engaged, so they have higher levels of productivity from these employees, fewer safety instances, and lower turnover. So it basically means that if you have a high job engagement, you find your work meaningful, you find your work satisfying, you're inspired by your organization or your leaders, and you have similar values. I later went to work for a vitamin company, and I was very interested in vitamins. I felt this was a product that helped people. It was, this was a product that could lead to overall good, and that I was interested in the ingredients and the effects, and I had a higher job engagement because, 1, I was working in finance, and 2, I was more interested in what the company was doing and the goals of the company, which were to make people healthy. Okay, so if you're a manager, you want to make sure that your extrinsic rewards for employees are not viewed as coercive, and meaning that people don't like to be forced to do something or feel like they're forced or pushed into something, or that you often get a negative reaction. And managers also need to recognize the importance of employees' intrinsic motivators that appeal to the desire for autonomy, relatedness, and competence. So managers have to be a little enlightened, understand that they can't just, use the stick and whip employees into what they wanted them to do. They have to use the carrot, and they also have to, think about what self-motivates people. So within reason, clear and difficult goals often lead to higher levels of employee productivity. So if you judge someone's skill and ability properly, and you give them a clear goal that's a little bit difficult for them to achieve, they'll work harder. Just like in a class, if you have a class that's easy, you're not going to work as hard than if you have a class that's harder, and the tests are harder, and the work is harder. You're going to work a lot more for the harder class and respect that class more than the easier class. Efforts to make, you have to include efforts to make and help your employees feel successful. So you need to work on how to increase your employees' motivation so they can be more productive for you as an employee. Ensure that employees are treated fairly. So if as a manager, you have to be very careful about how you treat employees, because they are going to compare and contrast your reactions on a daily basis. And if they feel any unfairness, that's going to be very demotivating for them. And employees are more motivated to engage in behaviors they think they can perform and which lead to more rewards for their value system. So aligning employees up with motivations, with tasks and jobs that they can be successful at, and will also contribute to their valued system, or will be most motivating. But keep in mind, make goals specific and difficult, meaning that there's a clear idea of what needs to get done, but yet it's not the easiest thing to do. Motivation can be increased by raising employees' confidence in their own abilities, self-efficacy. So as a manager, you're also a coach, and you're also trying to push people to achieve to maximum achievement, to increase their motivation. And openly share information on allocating decisions, especially when the outcome is likely to be reviewed negatively. So you want to be very open and transparent, so your employees feel like they're being included and they're understanding what's happening, so they could get a better sense of perceived justice, that things are being treated fairly, basically. Okay, so in summary to this hour-long lecture, we described the 3 key elements of motivation. We evaluated applications of early theories. We contrasted elements of self-determination in theory and goal-setting theory. We demonstrated the difference between self-efficacy, equity theory, and expectancy theory, and we identified implications of employee job engagement for management. Okay, so that is the end of this chapter 7 and motivational concepts. And next chapter, we're going to talk about applying these motivational concepts to applications, and that's even more interesting. So, see you soon.